by the way. Okay. Okay, so yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Billy Tang. I'm the senior curator of the Rockbound Art Museum. So it's the partnering institution collaborating with Para Site on the exhibition Curtain. I think as part of the public program, we've been organizing a series of spotlights. So it's a way, because I mean, I think group shows tend to be very complex and dense entities. And so this kind of format allows us to sort of focus on specific practices, personal experiences and insights that artists can kind of further illuminate kind of different entry points into thinking about the themes explored in this exhibition. So I'm very happy to be joined by Xyza Cruz Bacani. So yeah, so that's a kind of introduction to her practice. She's a photography-based practitioner who for nearly 10 years has been moving between many different realities that exist in urban cities around the world. Her concern is on the visibility of communities and groups of people that perhaps paradoxically and also precariously often invisible despite their stark visibility or presence or mark that they have in city life. So this may refer to the ideas of marginalized kind of communities that we, like we've somehow turned our eye away from, or we're kind of conditioned to glance at only quickly and never really fully registering their existence. Therefore, I think maybe her practice straddles between a type of activism to documentary concerns, I think with issues entwined with immigration and livelihoods that exist outside of the mainstream kind of legal framework or allocation of spaces where we are able to gather in the city. So I guess another issue that is kind of connects with me also personally as well, that we've been kind of having discussions about before this event, was also related to how this kind of relates to both of our kind of personal diasporic experiences that kind of informs a kind of a type of politics or motivation to kind of pursue different projects in different ways. How do we sort of explore these kind of boundaries? Maybe this kind of idea of an existence that is a quality of being uprooted, but in a positive way, perhaps, where it gives us an ability to observe reality at a kind of certain distance, which is useful to see things anew. So I think this is very much relevant to the kind of ideas behind the curtain, because as the curators, we're also thinking very much about this notion of like questions of visibility and invisibility related to different kinds of framing and stages that are of collective being in the public life. So yeah, that's kind of some issues I thought would be quite nice to sort of to kind of reflect on together with Xyza. So yeah, I thought maybe we could begin with the exhibition. Perhaps some of you have already seen the work, and what we did was to kind of disperse groups of photographs across the space in the site and Para Site. So yeah, I thought maybe Xyza, you could talk a bit about first maybe the decision behind your method of displaying these works. We talked a bit about kind of reflective glass and the relationship with the observer of being observed as well. And so, yeah, maybe we can begin by situating kind of how the work kind of like was displayed in the exhibition.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So I'm very happy to be part of Curtain's exhibition by Para Site. It's the second time that I did a show with Para Site, and during the process of selection of images, what I really love about working with them is they are very collaborative, and they really asked me what I wanted to do with the exhibition, because I'm not there. So it's quite, with the world today, it's quite difficult to do installation without being there. But because they're very, they communicated well, we were able to do my vision, and with the help of the curators as well, it was really well done. And Billy, I don't think we can see your screen.
Oh, Okay, let me
share screen perhaps. Yeah.
Okay.
There, that's good.
Okay.
There you go.
Apologies for this. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So with this selection, I sent them a selection of black and white and color images, and usually I don't mix pictures. If it's black and white, it's black and white. If it's color, it's color. But with this selection, we decided to pick some colors and some black and whites, because there are just some images who are very, it's better to be seen in color. Like, for example, the cover of the catalog, like you can see the texture of the images with the color green and everything. So the color really helped the image. And when we were doing some reflection on how can we install the image, I asked Para Site if we can use reflective glasses. With images, usually I usually use non-reflective glasses, because you want the people to actually focus on the photograph rather than having that reflection of them. But with this collection, because it's about curtains and it's about seeing the invisible and making the unseen seen, I decided to include the viewers as well, or the audience as well. And I want it to be an experience for both of an experience from viewing the photograph and being part of that photograph. So when they see their own reflection, it's like being there. It's like they're part of the scene. They're seeing it in a way, like seeing it in a way that there's viewing behind a glass or a curtain. So the idea of invisibility also is also very subtle, in a way that when they're looking at these images, for example, whatever is happening on the scene, because they're seeing it with their reflection on it, it's more like showing that in this life, in our life, the invisible can, it's, I don't know, I'm sorry, I speak different language and my brain have not code switched yet. So I'm thinking in Tagalog. That's why I was like, oh, wait. so it's more like I want people to be part of the photograph. And because of that, that's why we chose reflective glasses, and the idea of invisible curtains in life, because we have that, right? Like we all can say that we're very inclusive, there's diversity, we all have this talk about inclusivity and diversity, but there's always this glass between us and the people that we don't usually see, who make things happen in a society, something like that. Yeah.
Well, maybe could you perhaps describe, sort of in these 4 images, kind of the different protagonists and the kind of commonalities? Because what was surprising for me was on kind of first glance, it kind of reminded me of a lot of qualities of an urban experience in Hong Kong. But then it was really surprising that actually, in fact, there are many cities around the world, and this body of work kind of spans a period of time as well.
Yes, in these 4 images that we see, the first image of the woman is I took that in Nagoya, Japan. The second one is in Hong Kong, and the other one is Hong Kong as well. And the last one with the male looking behind a wall, similar to the Wailing Wall, the Berlin Wall, is actually taken in New York. So the reason why I chose different parts of the world, not just focusing on Hong Kong, because there's a commonality in every cities. It's happening not just in Hong Kong, but it happens all around the world. We don't usually see these people because we are so busy with our lives, or we're busy staring at our phones, that we don't realize that there's a lot of things that are happening behind walls, behind curtains.
And for example, in this image, I mean, and many of them actually, in fact, you can't see directly people's faces. And I was wondering, in terms of the kind of concerns that lead you towards how to depict a kind of person who potentially is belonging to a community that is maybe quite fragile, or kind of precarious, where they're kind of maybe operating in kind of semi-legal kind of situations. So the idea of perhaps like permission or the dialogue with them, I was wondering, how do you negotiate with this, and particularly with this image, for example? So it's very personal, but you also do not see the face, for example.
Sometimes when I do documentary projects, or when I go in and people welcome me into their life, I ask them if I can show their faces, right? So I ask for permission. Even though they say yes, sometimes their situation might not be ideal for their identity to be known. Sometimes they want to tell their story, but they don't want their faces to be shown because of some circumstances. So with this collection, if you can see, the faces are obscure. I decided not to show the faces because a lot of these people are part of our community, but then they're not really treated as one of us. So they want to obscure the faces. And for me, it's me giving them dignity, because, you know, photography is power. I always say that photography is power. Like, if I'm an asshole, I can just take the photo of their face because they gave me permission, right? I can just like post their images, and because there's permission from their side, legally I'm gonna be okay. But then there's something about being ethical and morally ethical about showing faces, especially when I know that it might lead to their to something. It might make their life difficult. So I always try to balance it. Like, how can I tell their story in a way that I will never harm them? It's one of the ethics that I try to go by. Do no harm with the people that I photograph, because a photograph is a photograph, but then if it can also ruin someone else's life, it can empower or it can destroy. So I try to balance that all the time, you know.
Well, for example, could you talk a bit more about in this particular circumstance, like how did you meet this person as well, and what kind of place that they were living in, and yeah, a bit more about this kind of story behind the image as well.
So for this image, I was in Japan, and Japan is a very beautiful country, but I'm always curious about, you know, the unseen. So I asked around if they know a mosque where I can visit, and then I went to this mosque in Nagoya, and they're very nice people. They welcome me, but as they say, you know, it's not easy to actually go in and introduce myself and be like, hey, I want to photograph the people who attend the mosque. And it took me like 2 days to get their trust. So with this woman, she's a Muslima in Japan, and they told me about what they go through because of the difference in religion. So their difficulties, there's a lot of things that they need to adjust to in a city where, you know, it's very different from where they came from. But then they were very happy that they actually have a mosque in Japan to go and worship. So this woman is well, this is like 4 years ago or 3 years ago. So she told me about her story. She have a daughter. Yeah, I remember she have a daughter, and then she travels 1.5 hours just to go to the mosque and worship, because that's the closest place of worship for her. And then yeah, I'm trying to remember every details, and I mean, it's been too long. So that's the reason why I did not show her face, because there's a lot of stereotypes against Muslims, and I think she doesn't want to be she just wants to be accepted in a society that's different from her culture. She doesn't want to be seen as an antagonist. She just wants to do her thing. She just wants to be accepted. You know what? She just wants to be tolerated. It's not even the level of acceptance. Tolerance and acceptance is two different things. But for her, she just wants to be left alone. She just wants to be able to do her own thing. She just wants to survive and live her life. So that's why I chose not to show her face. Yeah. This one, yeah, this was in Hong Kong, yeah. I think this is like after midnight. Like one thing that I noticed, sometimes when we're so busy with our life, we think that things just happen around us. We don't even know that someone else is doing that, doing things to make things happen. So this is in Causeway Bay. I think this is closing time. Yeah. Like you see a store only when it's open, but you don't really see that before they even open. Someone's already cleaning it, preparing it for the next day. And we don't usually see them, yeah.
And you lived for a long time in Hong Kong, and I think in a conversation we had, you also mentioned a lot about how often the speed of life is really almost like an exaggeration of the dynamics that's happening in many cities around the world, but you see things much more clearly perhaps with the situation in Hong Kong because of the density, but also the speed. I was just wondering in terms of, how do you navigate often around the city as well with your camera?
I've lived in Hong Kong for almost a decade as a domestic worker, and my relationship with the city back then was different because I always felt like I was an outsider. You know, I'm part of the city, I'm working for the city, but I will never be accepted in the city because there's a lot of different, circumstances. Like we are never allowed to get the right of a vote in Hong Kong. And so after a decade of working as a domestic worker while photographing Hong Kong, my relationship with the city changed into I became an artist in Hong Kong. I'm very lucky that I was able to transition to that. But then even though Hong Kong have been really kind to me, there's still a lot of things that I personally feel that I will never be part of the city because I'm different in a way that the color of my skin, my nationality. So I navigate. At first, I thought it was I wanted to belong. You know, there's this thing where you want to belong to a city, to a certain place because I've stayed there for a long time. And then I realized that me not actually belonging in the city gave me a different perspective of the city, because I've learned to see the things that people don't see because they're very busy with their life. I saw a bigger picture, and that's how I navigated the city when I was out and photographing Hong Kong. Yeah.
I was wondering, maybe in terms of perhaps this is related to a question of dignity, permission, but also because I was wondering how you locate your images. Is it kind of within the realm of a portrait or a documentary kind of approach to capture realities, or how do you sort of kind of see your photographic work? Or maybe it's because you mentioned Hong Kong made you into an artist now, but then at the same time there is maybe this kind of activism involved as well in your practice and reportage as well. And I'm just wondering, how do you really do you enjoy this ambiguity, or do you really sort of make distinctions as well?
Well, there are some distinctions because I do some activism on the side, but I don't want to call myself an activist because that's such a very there's so much responsibility on that. And I'm always in awe of people, of activists who are sacrificing so much for the cause. So with my photographs, I try to at least make it worthwhile, of a cause, certain causes, like for example, in migration. And then when I do journalism or on the side, because that's what support my art side. I mean, I needed to eat, right? So I do journalism on the side. But then even with this distinction, it's always about doing the work for me. It's always about taking the taking the photograph. Like for example, with this photo, I think I was drunk when I took this. I was in a part. I came from a party in MoMA. This is in the MoMA. I remember now, in MoMA PS1. So I'm probably drunk on that one. Then I saw this, and then I was like, oh, that's a very good picture. It's a moment. You know what I mean? Like this is a wall now I remember this picture really well. So this is in MoMA PSO in Queens. So behind that really big wall, there's a party, a dance party. And I came out from that party. And then I saw this person looking trying to look what's happening inside. So I was like, oh, that's the moment. So for me, the moment is very important in my practice. It doesn't need to be journalistic. It doesn't need to be about activism, but it's a need for me to photograph a moment, you know.
This was exhibited next to the window, so you could also like sort of see the cityscape in Hong Kong. So in the space that we had, like there was only one window and kind of gravitated towards that direction, and then you sort of confronted with this image. So this is definitely in Hong Kong, I guess, this particular image.
Yeah, this is Hong Kong. I woke up really early and then I saw this. I mean, we don't really notice window cleaners, right? Unless we look at on the window. We think that windows clean themselves, but it's not. It's one of the most dangerous jobs that I've seen in Hong Kong, where this Sifu is like just cleaning the windows. I think this is construction as well. Yeah, this is a construction. Yeah. So they were doing something on the window, and the reason for the X is, you know, when there's a typhoon 8 or more in Hong Kong, we put those sticky tapes so that to break the wind. So it's something that was very Hong Kong for me when I saw this, and I like the mystery of, you know, just the hand. The composition is great. I love this photo.
Because so are you always carrying a camera? So I mean, what's the kind of balance between something that's planned, where you might return to a location again and again, and maybe there's other moments that was more spontaneous, like the image before? Was this like you intentionally went to this area for curiosity? I was also wondering how you balance this as well, like kind of plan, spontaneity. Yeah.
Well, when I do my documentary projects, I usually do a lot of research. When it's like a whole photo essay or a whole set of images, it's usually me doing a lot of research, and then I go back to that place over and over again to capture a candid moment. But there's already a narrative on that story. But with these images, these are very candid. It's just like me walking around with a camera and then suddenly seeing it. It's not intentional, but I know that with Hong Kong, it's always, or anywhere around the world, there's always something happening. If we really want to see, you know, if you really want to look at what's happening around us, then there's always something to photograph. Yeah.
Is there any works that you've actually staged before, or is it always kind of a candid moment for you?
When I do portraits, that's the time that I stage something. Like when I do a portrait image, I always ask the person, but I always declare that it's a portrait to make the distinction between the candidness of documentary and a portrait photo.
I mean, this is, for me, perhaps quite striking about something like this image, where you have a very ad hoc, kind of improvised kind of moment in a public space, which is, I mean, particularly rare in Hong Kong, I would say, where it's almost machinic in how they commercialize or define where something or this and this should happen. So I mean, almost there's like a band of images that kind of gravitate towards these kind of moments as well, I would say. For example, could you describe this one a bit more, this moment?
This is during a Sunday. These women are migrant domestic workers in Hong Kong, and every Sunday they do a lot of wonderful things. Like, for example, with this one, they're cleaning or doing a pedicure to each other, and because it's very hot that day, they were using the bags to cover their heads, because, you know, we generally don't like the sun. I mean, I don't as well, because it's gonna make us darker. So in this image, you can see a sense of community in the migrant domestic workers. You know, it's a sense of them relaxing on their day off and doing not the usual thing when you think of domestic workers. Oh, they're just working, but actually they're women who likes to have their pedicures done too. So it's actually breaking the stereotype of migrant domestic workers. So I love taking photos like that, showing the humanity that of migrant domestic workers in Hong Kong. Yeah.
I think this was Cosmin's favorite image.
Mhm.
Yeah. And this is what kind of space is this as well? Like this is, I haven't really seen this, but is this in a public area also as well?
This is in a public area in underpass in Hong Kong, the subway in Hong Kong Central. So every Sunday, because these migrant domestic workers in Hong Kong are sitting on the floor on the roads, they try to get a little bit of privacy, and they use different curtains to at least get that sense of privacy, because they have nowhere to go to relax. And one thing that I noticed in Hong Kong with the expensive restaurants who have, like, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, like for example in IFC, the rooftop in IFC, where they have these public chairs that you can, I don't know if it's public, I'm not sure, but Monday to Saturday, those chairs are available for anyone to sit to use. But on Sundays, they tie it up. They tie the chairs so no one can use it. And for me, that's very deliberate, because migrant domestic workers goes out every Sunday and they need a place to sit. So with this one is it shows that migrant domestic workers, even though they're sitting on the streets, they still want to have some privacy. They just want a place to rest without people looking at them passing, like people walking, just walking. So it's them wanting a sense of privacy, especially in Hong Kong. Like the space is really expensive,
So in terms of, again, this idea that I think wanted to sort of emphasize again was this idea of dignity, control, representation, visibility. Like in terms of also the ability to have access to spaces, also the ability to come into Hong Kong. For example, you mentioned that you were a domestic worker, and now you became an artist during your time in Hong Kong, which somehow has now popularized your ability to go back to the city, because it's really sort of instituted towards only having one kind of label and one possibility to become in the city. And maybe you could share this experience with us as well, just so we can.
So after working as a domestic worker, I went to New York. I went to study, and then I got a grant to return to the city and do the commission work. But it took us a lot of paperwork to actually change the perception that I was a domestic worker. Like, okay, she's not gonna come in here as a domestic worker, but she's now returning as an artist. So I have a lot of experiences at the airport where when they look at my visa, they look confused. like what are you doing in the city? And then I'm like, oh, well, I'm an artist. And they're like, yeah, but it shows here that you were a domestic worker. Yeah, 2 years ago or 3 years ago. So I always need to explain, and it's a very traumatic experience for me, because even though we were able to fix the paperwork, there were tons of it, like very thick paperwork, and then I have to explain myself every single time that I enter Hong Kong. And then even I also had this experience when queuing up, like when you leave Hong Kong, and so there's a queue for domestic workers, there's a queue for Hong Kong residents or with a different ID. So when I try to queue on the side of Hong Kong residents, the people at the airport who's working at the airport will be like, no, go there. It's like, you can't use this line. And then I need to explain that why not. And then the domestic workers there. So even though not knowing who I am or not seeing my ID, they already assume that I am a domestic worker. And for me, there's nothing wrong with being a domestic worker. But the thing is, it's the stereotype that if you're a domestic worker, that's who you are. That's the only thing that you can become. You know what I mean? That you can't be somebody else. They put you in this box, and because it's easier to understand, I think. And I really try to understand that. And for me, it's more like, well, it's easier when people put other people in a box or in a checklist, and then it who's that person again? This host in Trevor Noah. He wrote a book, and what he told me about it, what he wrote in the book is actually fascinating about people's assumption towards other people of color. Like when I speak Chinese, I speak Cantonese, but I speak Cantonese really well, and so I can I can do a normal conversation with other people. So when I do that, the other person I'm speaking with becomes friendlier to me. So it changes their perception. So there's a lot of things that I'm navigating, but for me, it's always about understanding where these people are coming from, because again, it's easier to put another person in a box rather than understand that there's a lot of complexity in human beings, you know.
Mm. It's really interesting in terms of, that's related to the discourse of images and photography in terms of framing. How is something, because often the visibility or representation is reduced, like over migrant worker, to just one homogeneous identity. Like they're not imagined as people that can just become something else, right? Which is something you were sharing. So there's a kind of segregation between people, that I think, in a way, like that, the role of the artist gives agency to really sort of imagine beyond this, and combined with the experience of being a diaspora, of being influenced by many cultures, being able to kind of see something from a distance, and not take it for granted in a sense. I think that's very empowering. I was wondering, maybe we can talk a bit now towards the kind of context of an exhibition as well. So we've been talking about your approach to photography, and how do you sort of, for example, in this image, would you like to talk a bit more about this exhibition, for example, and projects as well?
Yeah, so this is from my from We Are Like Air. It's a book, actually. It's a book, and then it's been exhibited a lot of times. And as a photography-based artist, I try to present, when I do presentations or I do installations, I go beyond just putting an image on the wall, because photos can be three-dimensional, not just two-dimensional. So for example, with this one, I collected quotes from different migrant workers and then projected it on the wall, and which is still connected with the book. So I collected the quotes from my book, We Are Like Air, and projected it on the wall. So it goes on a loop. And then the embroidery, the cross stitch that was hung on that's a photo from the book as well. And I did that project in a way that people who visits the exhibition can also do some embroidery if they want to. And while I was doing that embroidery, I was doing it in spaces in Hong Kong where they don't allow migrant workers to sit down unless they buy something, like for example coffee shops. So it was like a public public installation as well, in some ways, because I was like embroidering on the subway. I was doing embroidery on coffee shops who doesn't allow migrant workers to sit down on their holidays. I was going to restaurants doing it. So it's more like taking over or reclaiming spaces that were not allowed for us. So yeah, I haven't really finished though. It's a difficult thing to do, the embroidery, to be honest.
So is this connected to the We Are Like Air publication?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
And there's also the connection with your mother as well. So
yeah.
So yeah, could you talk about this as well in terms of, I think that's very important, this kind of aspect of also as a diaspora experience of there's also a transgenerational kind of connection as well in terms of shared experiences or differences perhaps, and yeah, I was kind of interested in the decision to make this publication in connection with your mother, for example.
Well, I do think that the most difficult thing that I have done since I've been working full-time as an artist was when I made the decision to photograph my family and include it in the publication, especially my mother, because there's a certain level of vulnerability when when we're actually showing the things or the people that we love. It's very different when I'm taking photograph of people that I collaborate with, of people who are willing to tell me their story. When I decided to publish the story of my family, it was cathartic at some point, but then it's also scary because of the sense of vulnerability that I am putting my family in the eyes of other people, and I'm always protective of them. But I never realized that the story of my family is not a special story. Actually, it's very typical. It's something that is happening to a lot of Filipino families when it comes to migration, and We Are Like Air is such a difficult project because of that sense of vulnerability that I have to show. I need to show the generational trauma of migration, and it took us a long time to heal. I mean, with me as well, it took me a lot of healing because a lot of wounds were reopened when I decided to photograph my family. Yeah.
Do you think, for example, for myself, I feel like we have a responsibility to carry the message of the earlier generation, but also I think in terms of also we're gifted maybe with more tools now in terms of the things that we have at disposal. Maybe through generation we're more lucky in the sense of access to resource. And do you feel that responsibility as well? And do you feel optimism of this generation that we're in as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a certain responsibility that is invisible responsibility because they never really ask us, but somehow it's like a cloud over us that we are responsible in some ways. Like we need to do better because we're now representing them, and then we need to there's this pressure to be a better person, to be successful because they sacrifice so much for us. So there's this sense of responsibility to represent them really well. And then it's difficult, and I do have more hopes for this generation, our generation, because I do think that the world is changing. There are things that were allowed before, and the Me Too movement, all of that. I do think that there's more hope, but there's a lot of things that needs to be done yet. We're just starting. Yeah.
Another thing I would say is another issue is guilt. Like the fact that with immigrant families, you have to be functional, you have to earn, you have to survive. It's really drowned into us since we were as children. So to be an artist is almost like the opposite kind of path in a sense. So there is a guilt as well, and so it's interesting as well, I think.
Yeah, it's fascinating how my parents still thinks that I'm not working when I'm not doing anything. When they don't see me like actually working, they think that I'm not working. They're always worried. They were like, "Why are you not working?" I'm like, "I'm thinking," and they're like, "Yeah, but that's not work." So for them, it needs to be something tangible, and they're always worried that being an artist is difficult, and it's quite difficult to explain to them that I'm fine, I'm okay, this is part of the process. But you're right about that guilt that that we feel.
This image is very striking in terms of how it's the idea of segregation perhaps, but also coexistence, and it's very complex. Could you talk about this image a bit more as well, perhaps?
I photographed this, I think 2019. So in the image you can see the migrant domestic worker on her room. It's very packed, it's very tiny. There's a lot of things on it. I think it was a storeroom or something. And then the family that she serves, so they're in their home, and I'm very grateful that they allowed me into their home. So these are the kids that she's been taking care of, and she's well loved. And the reason why I photograph it this way is because the problem of space in Hong Kong. I'm receiving a lot of messages lately of domestic workers is sleeping on toilets, balcony, and everything. So with this one, even though the room is very tiny, at least she have her own privacy, and that is something that is rare. That is something that people don't usually see. But it also, I compose it that way as well, to show that there's always going to be a divide, or there's always going to be a wall between migrant domestic workers and Hong Kong, because they're only as good when they can serve. Sometimes I still feel that, but I'm not saying that, Hong Kong people are like that. It's not Hong Kong people, it's the system that allows it to happen. Like, for example, no right of a voting, you only have 2 weeks. If you lose your job, there's a lot of like visa issues. So it's not Hong Kong people, it's the system, and I hope that we can change the system.
I think we have, we can maybe, shall we go to the recent project that you're doing? Because maybe a last kind of comment and observations or insight that you can share related to now is with the pandemic, travel is very difficult, it's disrupted many of us. But I think what was interesting that I hadn't really heard from other artists speak about actually was for you, like, the sense of community is really essential to how you connect with different subjects and concerns, and especially with the situation in the Philippines, the inability to be part of communal life is something that's really sort of been a drastic change for you. So I was wondering if you could share with us this as well, and how you've adapted as well, and maybe connect with this new project that you're working on as well.
Well, with the pandemic, I think my biggest struggle as an artist was I lost my own community. I grew up in the Philippines, but I spent a lot of time in Hong Kong. My friends are in Hong Kong. My art community is in Hong Kong. So when I was not able to return, there's like a certain, I lost something. I lost my community. I lost the people that I go to buy my coffee, just a simple hello and nod. I lost the regular interaction that I have with people, and I don't know how we can go back to that, and hoping that we can go back to that. And for me as a photographer, it's important for me to be able to have that core of community, because if I don't have that, I felt lost, to be honest. I felt lost on the first few months of the pandemic, but then I realized that the best stories are in my own backyard. So I started interacting with my neighbors. I started rediscovering my own town. That's when I did a lot of stories in my own hometown. And I'm doing this project now about single mothers in the Philippines. And it's about women who chose to be single moms. I mean, the Philippines is a predominantly Catholic country. Being a single mother is difficult. It takes a village to raise a child, but imagine raising a child alone. And then there's all these stereotypes. There's all this, there's a lot of difficulties being a single mother, but these women are empowering themselves by choosing to be single moms. Yeah. So that's the core of the story. It's more like women empowerment. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's a good, maybe we can open up to the floor if anyone has any questions or comments on the conversation that we've had. It'd be really lovely to hear. Or we can also show a quick clip what people think.
Yeah, that's very quick.
Oh, yes, that's very quick.
Yeah. I like this project because turns out to be something that is very dynamic. It's not just photographs. I'm playing with moving images as well. Yeah.
And where is your next destination? If you mentioned, I think you still have plans to go to New York.
Yeah, I'm returning to New York to study for my master's in arts politics. I'm a WMA scholar, so I'm very happy with that. So Wing Foundation is sending me to school, which is amazing. And I think it will really help me hone my theoretical thinking, because I don't have an undergrad, but I got lucky and still got accepted for graduate school. So it's a good opportunity for me to be able to think better. I think my critical thinking will get better, I think.
Okay. Are people sure there's no comments, questions you would like to ask? You can leave it in the comments, or you can unmute.
Yeah, you can unmute yourselves. How do you do this?
Or Xyza, do you have any if we wanted to be a photographer, what would your advice be?
Well, just do the work. It's difficult. It's not that, I think photography have a bad reputation of being easy because everyone nowadays is a photographer. I mean, with mobile phones, it democratized the photography. Everyone can actually, tell their own stories. Like if you go scroll Instagram, you can see that a lot of people are giving us windows to their lives, and that's fascinating. It's very fascinating, but it's very curated. We don't really show the ugly side. Is always the good side. So it's still very much curated, and we must always remember that if you want to be a photographer, you must do the work and be interested in other people, in your surroundings, in your community, and whatever is happening around you. You need to be really interested, and because it takes a lot of energy resources to be able to be in a space where they allow you to tell their stories, because they are already telling their own stories through social media. Like if you go to Facebook, Instagram, I mean, nowadays TikTok, so that's what it takes nowadays. Just do the work. And there's a saying, I don't know who said it, like build and they will come kind of thing. So you must keep doing the work. And yeah.
So
wow. You must be really so good at doing this because no one have a question.
Yeah, we also are in a marathon, so it's a marathon, not a race. So I guess people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think this is it's a good note to finish if no one has any more further questions. Thank you so much, Xyza, for your time and to share with us your insights.
There's a question.
Oh, there is? Okay.
Oh, it's Raymond. Hi, Kuya Raymond. Thank you for joining us. So he says being your next project about single mothers will be something to look forward to. So will this be done going around the archipelago or just within your area? Well, I think the good thing about doing stories like this is it's always relatable. I think that's one of my process of my practice. The story needs to be relatable. So even though I do it just here in my area, people in other places can actually relate to it because there's a certain commonality to people. I mean, we are all the same. We experience the same things, and sometimes experiences are shared around the world. It's not just an experience that is that people go through in a certain location. It's something that happens in different areas of the world. Like in single mothers, I do think that it's something that Southeast Asia can relate to, even though I'm just gonna do it within my area. It's something that other mothers can relate to because motherhood is a commonality. It's something that is similar to, we all have our mothers, and those mothers experience something else, something similar, even though they could be single moms or married moms, something like that. Yeah. Thanks, Peter. That's nice. Huh. And of course, traveling is hard nowadays. So I prefer to do stories on my own backyard. It's just difficult to travel. Yeah. Yeah. So no questions, huh? Are we really that good? So Billy, what's next for the museum?
Next for the museum, yes, we will be opening after a very highly anticipated renovation. So we've been closed for almost like 1.5 years now. And yeah, so next month, July the 23rd, we'll be opening a new museum, a new exhibition. So we often do solo exhibitions, and the next artist is a Swiss artist called John Amlita.
That's nice. That's really good. Yeah. I mean, I'm very happy that you know, Curtains is my first in-person exhibition. Actually, I haven't been really. I took a break from doing an exhibitions, and when the pandemic happened, you know, people were like, "Oh, you should do an online exhibition," and I'm like, I already have Instagram. I want my pictures to be experienced by. There's something magical with exhibitions because the art piece can really connect to the audience directly. Maybe I'm very traditionalist, but I do think that there's something for me, that's what art is about, you know, making that connection to the piece of art. When you see it in person, it's just something that is electrifying. So I'm very happy that I'm doing, you know, I'm part of this curtain exhibition with Para Site, and I'm very jealous because I won't be able to see it in person.
Yes. We have a question from Karima, Deputy Director of Para Site. She says, does observing through the camera lens change your perspective or create distance for you with your subjects, or is the experience not so simple?
I'll go with the experience not so simple. It's a process. When you're holding the camera and you're trying to photograph a scene, it just engulfs me in a way. It takes me in instead of push me out, because I need the scene to take me in, or else I won't be able to create a photo that is compelling. So I usually go in a photo without judgment, and my perspective, there shouldn't be any perspective. It's just the scene taking me in, engulfing me in, and taking that photograph. It's a process, to be honest. It's something that I still experience, and I'm very happy about that, because I think the only time that I will stop taking images is the time when I don't feel joy taking images, or when the time when a certain scene or a certain personality or a certain frame doesn't take me in anymore. Then that's the time that I will stop. It's a very good process. I love it. You know, it makes me really happy. I don't know, but also when it's a very difficult scene, I'm very porous. I feel what the person in front of me is feeling when I'm doing photography. So when I'm actually taking photos, I usually end up either happy or miserable. Miserable because I felt what that person is going through, and so it can be different feelings, or it's a very complicated process. But what I do all the time is to be open-minded and just let the scene take me in. Yeah.
I think, yes, we have 3 minutes now until the next event. So I guess that's a really good note to finish and conclude. So yeah, thank you so much, Xyza. I think we're all looking forward for the new projects as well. So yeah, let's looking forward for that to be shared. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I mean, enjoy the exhibitions. It's still open, right? Until July. So enjoy the exhibition, because, you know, you're open with exhibits. So I'm very thank you so much, Para Site, for having me. It always feels nice to be still included in these types of shows. I feel that I belong a little bit. Thank you so much, Billy, for the wonderful talk. Yeah. And thanks, guys, for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.